How Mythology Became Fantasy. Welcome to the review. Many of us know growing up exactly what this and this are. From ancient times, and as we can see from our own lives even today, mythology has bled into becoming a part of our culture. But what exactly is mythology? And what is it in the context of today's 21st century modern age? Let's get into it. Well, right off the bat, we can break mythology down into a few key characteristics. It has a story that is or was considered a true explanation of the natural world. There are characters who are often non-human, including flawed heroes. The setting is in a previous proto-world, somewhat like this one, but also different. And the plot may involve interplay between worlds, this world and previous or original worlds. No different from any other book you might read today, right? Well, that's where number 5, ontology, comes into play. Essentially, ontology is the study of being or existence, and is significant because it distinguishes mythology from fantasies we see today or other fictional works. But then what makes mythology so different from religion? Well, that's because today, while mythology is viewed as fictional like fantasies, religion is still believed to be true, like so.
Moses, this is the Lord thy God, commanding you to obey my law. Do you hear me?
Yes, I hear you. A deaf man could hear you.
What?
Nothing, Gornish, forget it.
The Lord Jehovah, has given unto you these 15...
Wait.
10 commandments!
As for mythology, we must consider the following. First, we have to note that mythology is all fictive and conceptions of our imaginations. I mean, come on, there are no giant cyclops and lascivious thunder gods out there, right? Right. While they are figments of our imaginations, myths do tend to find their inspiration in the real world, such as apocalyptic floods and dragons. In fact, J.R.R. Tolkien, who we'll talk more about in just a minute, said, "I believe that legends and myths are largely made of truth, and only present aspects of the truth, which can only be received in this mode." So while they're just made up stories, mythologies find their inspiration in the truth, whereas religion is considered to be 100% reality. In fact, for many ancient civilizations, the stories we read today as mythologies were actually their religion, and over time they've gradually evolved to be enjoyed as pastimes, and eventually inspire the many fantasies that are so beloved today. So getting to the meat of the agenda, we see that myths aren't written anymore. So what happened to them? Well, in the past, myths were a religion as well as an oral tradition, being shared between individuals as epics. Homer's Iliad and Odyssey were the most notable among them, but if they were so popular back then, why aren't they being written anymore? Over time, the oral traditions that were so crucial to society and culture quickly became antiquated, especially with the advent of the written tradition. Aristotle in his Poetics notes that these epics that were so prevalent eventually were replaced by the tragedies, such as Oedipus Rex and the Oresteia. While they were no longer epics, tragedies were no less important, essentially carrying on the functions of the epics. However, if we look at today's literary world, where are these epics and tragedies? As society evolves, so too does literature. Eventually, the popular form of storytelling wasn't the epic or tragedies anymore. Instead, the bookshelves and bookstores of today are populated by novels, of which fantasy is a popular genre. Of course, works of fantasy pale far in comparison to the loftiness with which myths and epics are regarded with by literary scholars today, but they are no less important to the functioning of our modern culture. And these fantasies that we all love today only truly began taking off with Tolkien and The Lord of the Rings. There's a term coined by Tolkien meaning the conscious attempt to create myths, mythopia. Today we have many such examples, including Harry Potter, The Lord of the Rings, and Game of Thrones, the latter two of which we'll be looking at more closely. Tolkien was the first large-scale culprit of mythopia. As its creator, it makes sense. His singular idea of Middle-earth has spanned 4 full-length novels, 2 trilogies of films, and a myriad other companion and unfinished works. Alright, so why are we even comparing myths and fantasy? Mythopia, right? I mean, look at this guy. So with The Lord of the Rings, Tolkien attempted mythopia, and he definitely created a mythology. What we see in Middle-earth are more than just elves, dwarves, men, and monsters having a political conflict. His unpublished works reveal that Tolkien had an entire universe, including a complete history of Middle-earth and the origins of how these beings came to be. and even included a parallel to Satan during the conception of the world, named Melkor. Among all the interesting aspects of the history of Middle-earth, I think the most important thing to notice here probably is that Melkor fell away from Tolkien's heaven in a similar manner to that of Satan, mirroring the creation of the world in Christian doctrine and John Milton's Paradise Lost. Just as mythology and religion all have these creation myths, so do fantasies such as The Lord of the Rings. They're an attempt at creating mythologies, which is why we're comparing them today and why they're so important to the modern age. Of course, that's not the case for all fantasies, which is why these works are considered fantasies instead of mythologies. We don't actually believe elves and monsters exist among us, but we see these stories as metaphors to explain the world around us. To us, they're just entertaining stories that we can maybe learn something from, and vicariously enjoy a mirrored reflection of our own lives. So what's the point of all this? Why mythologies and fantasy? As I mentioned before, fantasies are basically the modern version of mythologies. But with the advent of scientific research and the ever-presence of religion, people's sense of entertainment and creative storytelling is kinda left hanging. That's where fantasy stories and their importance and significance to us come in. Without the mythopia endeavors of Harry Potter, The Lord of the Rings, and Game of Thrones, among many others, what else would be more entertaining to talk about than the latest twist in J.K. Rowling's magical world? Or the years-long cliffhangers George R. R. Martin leaves us with as he slowly but surely makes his way through the Song of Ice and Fire, and the awful, awful ending to Game of Thrones. So while mythologies found their significance in ontology, they still played a crucial function within the social aspect of the ancient world. Similarly, without fantasies in novels and films, our society would probably be left wanting a bit more color in our everyday lives. These days, we're even getting stories that are causing literary uproars by breaking the Western traditions. But maybe we'll get more into that later in another video. There's so much of our cultures and societies that are being left undiscovered, and so much entertainment yet to be unearthed more than millions of years after the first human society developed. That's where the power of storytelling and the mythologies that dotted the world in the past and the fantasies that pepper our world today will play their role. Mythologies were able to bring people and one culture and society together. You have to look no further than the thousands of online communities, Facebook groups, Instagram pages, and friendships that have been formed from the fantasies that pepper today's society. That's the value of fantasies. That's how mythologies evolved into fantasies. Not just bringing similar people together, but bringing disparate peoples and disparate communities together, where all differences and prejudices are set aside to share in one collective culture. That's been it. Thanks for watching. I'll see you around.